Good afternoon. It's a little before 4 o'clock Central Standard Time on December 14th, 2022. I'm in Dallas, Texas. How are you doing? Yeah? Today I found an edition of the Wall Street Journal dated for December 6th, 2022. In Section A, in the opinion page, here you go, Tuesday, December 6th, 2022, is an editorial called Behind the Global Surge in Anti-Semitism, Global View by Walter Russell Mead. You know, I read this a bit earlier. I read the editorial, thought about it. It's very interesting to me the way he puts the information that's in this editorial, including the fact that it's in Section A, and there's another article, Section A, that's very important. You know, we just finished the year of the ox. Did you know that? We're a little over, a year from the year of the ox, right? I've been reading about the pumpkin papers, so it was one of those things. Kind of reminded me of something that was going on around this time, 2 years ago. Anyhow, I'm in Texas, and Texas is one of a number of states in the United States that implemented state laws that make it illegal to honor any boycott, divestment, or sanctions strategy against the nation of Israel. At the same time, predating that law that was implemented in 2017, officially in September 1st, but I contend was actually practically applied prior to its official implementation on September 1st of 2017. The Texas Comptroller Code has a number of very alarming conditions that I contend are not only anti-Semitic, but are also evidence of hate crimes against people of Irish descent. Specifically, requirements regarding equal opportunity employment from people from Northern Ireland, and listing Israel as a permanent funder of local school bonds. Now, the school bond situation in the state of Texas goes all the way back to the founding of the Republic. I used to have primary source documents, books that were published out of Texas A&M, that, among other things, were composed by the then Secretary of State, but also had a forward from the Lieutenant Governor that described the history of the Texas Senate under the Republic, as well as during the early days of the state of Texas. Discussed myriad matters, including the permanent school fund and the relationship of the permanent school fund when it came to matters pertaining to Texas Senate discussions and confrontations even, including confrontations that led to members of the Senate isolating themselves in the Senate building and being threatened with arrest if they did not attend a vote, if they did not allow enough of their membership on the floor to attend a vote, at least enough to establish quorum so that they could vote on a bill, including, among other things, matters pertaining to bonds that were set up in connection with a strategy associated with leaning on the school fund, or rather borrowing from the school fund. Number of these bonds included railroad bonds, early railroad bonds in the state of Texas. Now, I've recently uncovered information regarding actions that were engaged during the Civil War by then Union General Ulysses S. Grant, specific to the railroad and preclusions on access to railroad travel or port access for people identified as Jewish. One of at least two instances during the Civil War when Ulysses Grant took unilateral action as the commander of the Union forces to make specifically ethnically identified preclusions on actions by Jews, regardless of whether they were from the South or the North, that then were appealed to the then President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, who had to provide formal confirmation that he did not authorize Ulysses Grant to do this. However, in the interim, these actions were put into effect for a substantial amount of time. And I've also found information regarding relationships between Ulysses Grant, including later, after the Civil War, and the Vanderbilt Empire, including in connection with loans, right? Loans that were identified as illegal. Now, we've never had a public discussion in this country about that. But I contend that in connection with an understanding of the timelines of the original debt that was issued by the United States Treasury in regard to bonds associated with the buildup to the Civil War as well as the Civil War, and then later during Reconstruction, that the timelines fit up until this time. I'm not being pedantic. I'm not engaging historical revisionism. There's a great deal about the American history that's been intentionally obscured, as if the regular person, average person, including somebody that for whatever reason was not adjudged to be financially capable of making it through a PhD program or Doctor of Jurisprudence program, it's not supposed to know about, so who does? Who had access to those primary source documents that discuss the specific anti-Semitic actions engaged during the Civil War, and not just in the South? It included evictions. It included entire segments of people fired from government jobs merely for being identified as Jewish. It included preclusion on being able to travel legally on the train. It included preclusion against being able to even use the port system in order to import goods or to send goods abroad. There's a very specific history that Americans of Jewish descent have, going all the way back to the Revolutionary War. We are in a country where there were actually Jewish brigades in the Revolutionary War. Who made a determination to select it out and to try to collapse the entire discourse of the history of the United States when it comes to Jews or anti-Semitism onto the current nation of Israel? It is a complete disservice, and it's un-American. Incredibly un-American. If you're a Jewish American, you've been denied access to your own history. I apologize. If you're not a Jewish American, but you believed you were entitled to co-conspire with a completely racist and anti-Semitic scam where you steal from Jews and then convert them for a resurrection into some redefinition as Christian, I don't apologize. It's not acceptable. It's un-American, and it's completely racist as well. Because my understanding of a great deal of the anti-Semitism that was allowed to be commenced around the Civil War not only had an impact on African people, people of African descent that not only fought in the Civil War, but also fought in the Revolutionary War. And what ended up happening with the political movements that developed immediately after the Civil War that have also been intentionally and willfully disappeared? It happened cyclically. Jim Crow did not happen in a vacuum. Neither did the complete annihilation of a legitimate, legal socialist movement in this country that included, among other people, blacks and Jews, but also a number of other peoples. You know, they said at one point in time that there was more than 10,000 labor dailies published in the United States of America, in more languages than you can count. Most of these dailies, these labor dailies, these daily newspapers that were produced on some cases for and by people that were actually working in factories, that were working in places around the country. Most of these labor dailies were not in English, at least initially. What happened to that history? Did somebody at the time, when they were trying to broker their access to the institutions of government, decide they were going to use them as securities underwriting, including on, what, 3-year notes, 7-year notes, 10-year notes, 20-year bonds? What happened in 20 years? What happened in 30 years? What happened after you flipped those 10-year notes 2 times, 3 times, 4 times? It's exactly what we're dealing with right now. Where were you on December 6th of 2012? I'm asking everybody this question. Do you know? If you think about it, some people are asked, Do you remember where you were on September 11th of 2001? Most people remember exactly where they were, what they were doing. We all have a story. What about September 6th of 2012? Do you remember where you were? Let me ask you another question. Do you remember where you were on December 6th of 1992? I bet that's a bit harder to answer, isn't it? This is an important matter. I don't apologize very often. When I do, I mean it sincerely. But I'm also very disappointed. This has been going on for far too long. Somebody feels at this point that there is a need to talk about anti-Semitism, which there is. So can we get it right this time? We need to actually get it correct. We need to be forthright. This is not something to be done in the dark. This is not something where you take a census of your people and then you might agree to offer up a certain percentage for tax purposes. Because what Ulysses Grant during the Civil War proved, that strategy doesn't work. It didn't work then, it's not working now. And I'm not just talking about Jews. I personally have been somebody for most of my life. I refuse to identify racially or ethnically. I refuse to get a blood test to talk about my bloodline. I refuse to even look at genealogical records until I came to Texas. When I did, it is what it is. The point of the matter is, I understand when you told me when I was 18 years old, I needed to take responsibility for being an American and coming from where I do. I had every intention of doing that. But did you? Did you? If you were born in this country, this legacy is yours. It's also your burden. You're not allowed to put it off onto anybody else. You're not allowed to wave it off onto anybody else. You're not allowed to evade the taxes. If you've got a problem with the tax policy, you have every right to change it, even if it means you need to alter, abolish, or reform the government to do so. I want to thank Mr. Walter Russell Mead for this editorial, but I hope he doesn't stop there, and I hope neither do you. My name is Charity Colleen Crouse.